that Santa Claus exists. That would be one of the ordinary meanings that would fit in, perhaps. And then we might ask, well, which code would be relevant here? Well, we're talking about acceptances. I'll get back to what that notion might mean. But we're also talking about belief. And so the relevant code seems to be that of rationality. So that would be one possible way of filling it in terms of the ordinary language meanings. So you might look at this as a way of treating ontological commitment as basic, rather than as an analysis, even though I might refer to it as an analysis. Acceptance, here I just have chosen to focus on a particular notion of acceptance, which is different from Stolniger's and Van Fraasen's notion, but it's one that would entail belief. So it's sort of a kind of sincere acceptance. And it would be occurrent rather than standing, so belief can be tacit or standing, whereas acceptance presumably is not. It's probably occurrent, so one can fail to accept a sentence that one believes. Now, ultimately, I think that we probably want to be pluralist about the primary bearers of ontological commitments. So it's not just acceptances of sentences that could ultimately carry commitments. So different speech acts and intentional acts with a T can carry commitments. So we could also at least imagine that an assertion of, so a genuine assertion of Santa is would require us perhaps by the rules of assertion to assent to the sentence that Santa is. We can also imagine that presupposing that Santa is would require us by the rules of presupposition to assent to Santa is. But I'll just focus on acceptance. So then the let's analysis here, which you might just take to be a sort of an explication of the ordinary language meaning of the word commits, would be something like this. So S commits us to S. Well, so at least one possible meaning of that would be accepting. So it's an acceptance of the sentence S that rationally requires us to believe that there are Fs. And, well, we might debate how to spell this out. The analyst sans here. One possible way would be in terms of a strict conditional. So necessarily, if we accept S, then we are rationally required to believe that there are Fs. That may turn out to be problematic. Okay, some objections and then some consequences after that. Oh. Okay, so we might worry. So the top line is just basically the necessary conditional, that necessarily if we accept S, then we are rationally required to believe that there are Fs, and that would be sort of a meaning analysis of that the sentence S commits us to Fs. Now, of course, if the antecedent of the strict conditional could be necessarily false, then we would run into some of the same problems as the other criteria. So could there be unacceptable sentences? Perhaps a more like sentence like A, it's raining, but I do not accept it's raining, which would be very odd to accept this sentence. And so we might worry that it's unacceptable, but if it's unacceptable, then again we have these the false antecedent of the strict conditional, and so we run into some of the same problems as the earlier notions or analyses of ontological commitment. So that would be a problem. Now, so here's one reply to that. Acceptance is a psychological notion, so it may be very odd to accept A, the A sentence, the more like sentence, but it's a psychological notion, acceptance, and so it seems that there's nothing sort of, there's no logical contradiction in actually accepting this sentence. It's really psychological and very strange if people do it, but so we wouldn't get the result where the antecedent of the strict conditional would be necessarily false. A further worry, which I won't really deal with because, I mean, that could be debated is, what about an infinitely long sentence? Is that unacceptable? Is there something that sort of logically will rule out that we can have infinitely long sentences that we could sort of utter and accept as we go along? That might be a possible problem. A quick other objection. So that goes the other way. Again, the first line is just the analysis of the analysis. So suppose there's some things that we are rationally required to believe no matter what, or under some very weak conditions. So in particular, suppose that if I accept the sentence, suppose as a world, I accept the sentence that 2 + 2 is 4. Well, then at least I have some minimal cognitive capacities if I can accept the sentence like that. And so you might think that I should, but just by my acceptance of that sentence, I am rationally required to believe that my mind exists. Well, why? Well, because it seems that if I have some cognitive abilities, perhaps, one might argue, I should just accept certain things that seem obvious to me that I have so that I can introspect and find out that my mind exists. And so perhaps that's something that I'm rationally required to do whenever I accept that 2 + 2 is 4. And so again, we would run into trouble, because then we would have the analysis would be satisfied no matter what S is. So 2 + 2 is 4 would commit us to the existence of my mind, which seems unintuitive. Basically, again, I think that we don't need a strict notion of rationality, and so we can simply reject that we are rationally required to believe that we have minds in any world where we accept sentences. So it would take the other things that would have to be in place. We would have to possess the concept of mind and so on. So one can suggest that it's a weaker notion of rationality that would be involved in this. Okay, so one more objection. Basically, when we're talking about belief context, of course, the traditional problems of belief will arise. And one problem, of course, for, say, mostly Russellian accounts of belief context and propositions and so on, will be that of empty names. But we can easily get empty names, right? Because it may be that we are talking about, well, what does the sentence 8 is an even number commit us to? Well, so accepting it, so suppose Mary accepts it, well, then Mary is rationally required to believe that 8 exists. But if 8 does not exist, then what does 8 refer to? So this is sort of introducing the range of standard problems when talking about belief. And there are some standard notions or solutions that one can invoke to this problem. One would be Phrygianism. Here we would posit that singular terms like 8 would undergo a reference shift in the scope of belief. So 8 really wouldn't refer to 8 when it's embedded under belief. It would refer to the concept of 8, or the sense of 8. Russellianism is not going to, in a simple, naive version, is not going to work if we want to preserve our intuitions about ontological commitments, because the very standard strategy in philosophy of language, endorsed by David Brown, Nathan Salmon, Scott Soames, and a bunch of other people, is to go gabby on these cases where you have non-referring terms. And so Brown, for instance, suggests that, well, if we have 8 occurring under belief, well, then 8 will just still refer to either an empty slot in a structure or the empty set. We can't endorse that, because then some of our intuitions will once again be violated, that were violated earlier on the extensional counts. So, for instance, 8 exists. I'm assuming that 8 still doesn't exist necessarily.